So here we are at our third video. Thank you for watching. We're drafting at Mock's Boarding House. This is our group, the Lobster Shack, the Discord. So we know everyone in the pod. We know sort of everyone's sort of draft style. We've drafted them a bunch, played against all these players a bunch, and they're all definitely pretty strong players. Opening the packs, we end up with Gar, Lando, and Rey. And this is a pretty terrible start. Lando is stone unplayable, and I think both Gar and Rey are both kind of a trap. I think they look stronger than they are, but just aren't particularly good leaders. I think the only real Gar deck is Gar Red. That's pretty aggressive, but not particularly good. And Rey wants you to play sometimes a little off curve for a leader in a format that wants to be pretty aggressive. So I'm not a huge fan of either. I actually don't like my first pick. I end up taking Gar, but I think I'm supposed to take Rey here. But I don't think it makes too much of a difference. And I'm looking to my left and I'm seeing I'm getting a Gar pass. So I guess with them having Kira, it's just so likely for them to pass the Boba Fett and Gar Saxon that like it even makes less sense for me to take Gar here, but I end up taking it and pass Rey and Lando. We're actually coming out with a video to sort of go over me and Wes's thoughts over what are the best leaders. Here we get past a Gar and a Boba Fett, and it's not even close. I mean, Boba Fett I think is just a stronger leader, and we don't want two of them. And the last one we get Fennec. So while we have some, options. Really, of the only like truly strong leaders, it's Boba Fett. I don't think Fennec is all that playable, and I just generally don't want to be Gar. And I'm not sure if I pan over the camera, but I believe I take a look and we see this. So like, we're not Gar. You know what I mean? We're just Blue Villas is not going to be open, and it's tough to be in this kind of position because you have to force a leader. Or in my mind, I'm forcing a leader, and that's not something you typically want to do. But if you look two to your right and you see that, those colors are going to be open, it's not the end of the world. So we open the first pack and we see Gar Saxon Gauntlet. And this is, I don't end up picking this. Let me just make this clear. And it's really difficult for me to pass this. I just don't want to pass it. The card is so strong. And Gar, it's just exactly what that deck wants to be doing. It's also just like a very clean answer to a lot of the space units that tend to outrace the Gar deck. Like it's just so strong in that deck, and I have that leader, but it's just so unlikely for me to be playing it that really I'm just like getting over the fact that I'm gonna pick a one resource 2/3 with a value, which I'm almost positive that's what I take. I actually haven't looked at this draft. This was actually last week's draft. Typically I record these a little bit sooner, so like my thoughts are still fresh. But this one's a little bit later. Like I'm just like I can just like see this after seeing this pack again. I'm just going through it again. I'm just like, man, why? I just want to take this Clan Saxon Gauntlet so bad. It's the only reason I'm taking that. It's like the only real pick. There's nothing else that's even close good to go, but it's essentially a dead pick. It's so unlikely for me to be specifically blue villainous. So I think I just end up making the discipline pick. Or maybe I'd take the Clan Saxon Gauntlet. Maybe I'm not disciplined. It's been so long. I can't even remember now. Sorry. What did I end up taking here? It's not correct if I take Clan Saxon Gauntlet. Yeah, okay. I take do I? Maybe? I'm like judging myself in the past. All right, good job, past me. Yeah, I really don't actually remember this draft super well. I it was I've done a couple drafts since this one, so they all start to get muddied. But like, at least like my thought process for how I think of the game in like a high level way is connecting to my picks, right? I'm not just like gambling and taking the Clan Saxon Gauntlet. I guess I'm looking at this thing a little bit to see because it is playable. It's fine. I think the real issue is it's just not for an aggro deck, and I think Boba Fett wants to be aggro. So yeah, I think the reason why I'm just struggling and just going back and forth is because The one resource 2/3 is not a great pack one pick one. What's great about this game is the fact that you don't have to take a rare or a bomb early on to be happy with your picks, but you also are not happy with a one resource 2/3. Here is a great card to be picking up, which is Modded Cohort. This is essentially what the deck wants to be doing. The strength behind Boba Fett is his ability to have ambush creatures, or have ambush units, excuse me, have +1 power, and Modded Cohort just falls super cleanly into this deck's plan. So happy to take a Modded Cohort. This is a lot easier and less strenuous of a pick. Seeing what's his name? Tondo, the 3 resource 3/5 bounty hunter is a little surprising. So I'm not sure what Wes is taking, but I also saw the village people, so it's unlikely that Wes is in Rey and probably just saw a better blue villainist card to take with his guard Saxon, which is what he's likely drafting. And it looks like Wes is taking a ton of time here, which makes sense because looking after the draft, I believe that two to his right was another Gar. So Wes is in kind of like an awkward spot here where he might be starting to get cut pretty early. These first two picks together though aren't like a terrible place to start. I'm super low on this card. The 2 resource 2/2 in space that comes out for 3. I'm just not a fan. I think it makes sense in the Hondo deck, but I think the Hondo deck is unplayable. Here it's really between tech and timely intervention. And this is one of the weirder picks. 'Cause tech is just a stronger card, right? Tech just fits pretty cleanly into my deck. He's a 3 resource 2/5, so stats aren't terrible. They're not great, but like tech is not what my deck wants to be doing, right? Like the odds of me playing a resource at 2 plus its cost is just so unlikely. So like sort of playing a below rate unit just isn't great. But at the end of the day, like there just isn't a ton of 3 resource 3/5s. So 3 resource 2/5 isn't the end of the world because he's able to stand some attacks and get for a couple damage. For that reason, I take him. And the other one is timely intervention is a common, so I'm likely to see more of them. I'm not sure if this pick is even correct, to be honest, but I think early on I just typically want to be leaning towards taking more playable units than taking events and upgrades, especially in a deck like Boba Fett, where you just want your units to be the ones that are trading, and let's be pushing through. So you want lots of ambush, you want lots of capture, that sort of stuff. And now we have a couple of different picks. We have timely intervention, this 3 resource 3/4 bounty hunter, a Y wing, and bounty hunter's quarry. I think I end up going with the bounty hunter's quarry here, which is a mistake. I think I just would have preferred to have a Y wing. Bounty hunter's quarry is a fine card, but in in a deck that just wants to be aggressive, you typically don't want to be playing bounties. And I think a Y wing just would have been better served just to get some extra damage in space and give my opponent some tough decisions. I don't think Y wing is a great pick either. I don't think I want to be taking a timely intervention this early, but of the two, I still think it's a mistake. I believe I didn't even end up playing the either of the cards, so I don't think it ends up matter. Or excuse me, the bounty. So I definitely think it was a mistake, and maybe the Y wing makes into my deck, but at the end of the world, it's not too big of a deal. Yeah, this is one of the like a much slower draft than usual, which is pretty atypical for how deep we are in the format. Usually they don't take this long between picks. All right, here we end up with two cards now. Night Owl Skirmisher is exactly what the type of units we want to be playing. So high power units for cheap. and Moment of Glory isn't a particularly strong card, even though it can be an okay finisher. So we end up taking that. I don't want to commit to two colors too early. I used to say I don't want to commit to red too early. I think Boba Fett really shines from being green yellow, and you don't need a ton of the yellow units. Really, you just need a couple of the key ambush ones. And typically, if a color is not open one way, it tends to be open the other way. So I don't think we see a ton of yellow come to us this way. At least not yellow heroic. So I think in my mind right now, I'm like, all right, I just want to stay as green as possible, and then get to a spot where we can take the yellow ambush cards coming the other way if it's not open, being passed to the left. So here we take Outlaw Corona. I think people have mixed feelings about this card because the effect is just so strong for opponents. But for me, if you're really aggressive, a three resource 3/5 that's pretty much only weak to the Cad Bane deck is extremely strong. It's just something we want to be doing. It's so difficult to answer. And next to that, I really like the two resource 2/3 in red that has Saboteur, because one of the easiest ways for our deck to be countered is by playing the Village People, the three resource 2/2 with Shielded and Sentinel. So it just provides a really clean answer. But again, I think the idea right now is to stay as green heroic as possible. So here's an interesting one. We end up with between WeK Pirate Gang and the Clone Deserter, and I believe I end up taking the Clone Deserter. Even though I'm talking about wanting cards that have ambush, I think the WeK uh, Pirate Gang or whatever it's called is just too understated for what it does. It's not it's using Boba's effect just to get even on stats at four resources. It's not trading up or clearing the way. So I think I'd rather take a one resource card that's a little more aggressively costed just to keep my deck as aggressive as possible. The restore one definitely helps, even when you're in aggro, when you're trying to race your opponents, it matters. And I think the bounty of draw a card is pretty negligible. The issue with bounty really comes from your opponents having cards that require bounty in order to be activated, and that's the real issue with bounty draw a card. I don't think actually having your opponent draw a card in a game where you're drawing two cards a turn in a 30 card deck is too big of an issue. Here we have another Outlaw Corona, and two is about the max that I'm going to be wanting to play, but I'm pretty happy to make this pick. Freetown backup is, I think it could be fine, but it's just, I don't know. I don't like having to attack with a weak creature then attacking with my stronger creatures in general. I think in general what you want to be doing is strong if you're I should say this, particularly if you're the aggro deck, you want to be attacking with your aggressive creatures up front so your opponent doesn't have a chance to interact with them, remove them from the battlefield, destroy them, capture them, whatever it is. You want to be guaranteeing the damage, and just setting up slightly more damage by playing other units that boost them just isn't a great idea unless there's something like the Delphi X-Wing, the 5 resource 4/6 that says attack, and if you have the initiative, get +2/+0, because you're not losing any tempo, right? You're not playing a bad creature to boost or a bad unit to boost your good units. So not a huge fan of it. Here, I'm basically never playing Warzone, whatever it's called. I take this thing just in case we end up being double green, which is, as of right now, isn't something that's off the table for me. I don't have to play the rest of these red cards. I don't have to be green yellow. I think there is a world where you get enough of two aspects that you could just play a two aspect versus three aspect deck. When I say two aspect, that means heroic or villainous plus a single color. Here we take the two resource 2/2. I think I'm pretty much just always resourcing this card, but it can be okay to have it come out later on as a 6 resource 5/5. Also, again, we just want to stay green. Again, for the reason, I'm just looking to take the green cards. I want to cut green as much as possible so I can make a later decision on what the second color is. If I open a bomb, I could easily pivot. But in the back of my mind, if I am going to play two colors, the second one I want to play is yellow, especially in Boba Fett. I think that's where the strength of that leader comes from. Yeah, and here's what we're looking for is like the timely intervention wield, something that I suspect would happen. It's a common. It doesn't really go in every single deck. It can be like a little mana intensive if you can't play it for its non-smuggle cost. So I like the card, but I typically like playing it as a one resource card as opposed to two. These last two picks don't particularly matter. I don't know. I think Lady Proxima might be better than Megs in Cad Bane, but I don't really like either of those cards, to be completely honest. I don't think either of them do anything. Lady Proxima in Cad Bane doesn't make the deck any better. The card is bad, and Cad Bane is good. Playing a bad card doesn't make your good cards better, and Migs only really works uh, with Kylo Ren, and Kylo Ren is just stone unplayable. Okay, here we open up a modded cohort and a DJ. And this is, I don't know if this is a mistake or not. I know Tech DJ is a really strong combo, but in my mind, I'm still wanting to be green. But conversely, if I do be yellow, if I do be a second color, if I end up a second color, I definitely want it to be yellow. But I just don't think I could pass modded cohort. I think it's just a more disciplined pick. But Tech DJ combo is cute. And there's also something we said about a 3 resource 3/5. That's pretty strong in aggro decks. I don't actually know what the correct pick here is. And I end up going with modded cohort, but I don't know. I don't know if that's correct or not. I don't think it's unreasonable to take yellow. The other thing to note is that 2 to my left is Cad Bane. So maybe in this specific scenario, I won't be getting a ton of yellow coming back this way. But I don't actually need a ton of yellow cards to really get a ton of benefit. Here's a weird spot because now this is the third pick from this pack, meaning the Cad Bane player passed Enfys Nest, which I'm unsure what they took over, and they passed Relentless Pursuit. So there had to have been some pretty bomby card in this, and I think this is where we need to pivot. This is probably one of the better 5 drops that this deck can get. It's just a clean 2-for-1 a ton of the time, and it can go up to 6 power with Boba. The rest of the pack is meh, and this is one of the cards that makes me want to be yellow. Notably, we do have to go down a card because now we have to put back the 4 resource 5/5 because it becomes a 6 resource 5/5, which just isn't great, but I think we're happy here. Just taking Enfys Nest, probably in good shape. Taking this card and just pivoting into green-yellow aggro, which is ideally what we want to be. Don't think we're going to get a ton more yellow cards with CAD 2 to the left, but maybe there's enough yellow villainous that we can catch a few stray Cloud Riders or something like that. Here we see Discerning Veteran and Enslaved or Freed Slaves. Discerning Veterans, a very strong card in aggro. I think when this card was, or when the set was first released, I looked at this card as a more of a control card, but the reality is that because the units can interact with each other, they can attack each other in this game, it's just so easy to deal with a 5 resource 3/4. So I think the strength of the card comes from being able to take your opponent off of something with Sentinel or off something that can eat 2 of your creatures. So typically you want to develop your board and then play this to clear the way. I don't think it's something that helps you get back from like an unfavorable board state. I think it's something that helps close out the game when you have a favorable board state. Right now I'm looking through my curve, and one of the issues that I'm seeing is that I don't have a ton of 2-drops, which is concerning. It's really important to have a sort of like gluttony of 2s in your aggro decks because you basically cannot miss your turn 1 and 2 plays. So I'm deciding, like, do I take the strong yellow card or do I just take a Gamorrean Retainer, a 2 resource 3/2, which is just a fine static card with Sentinel, and Sentinel is good in aggressive decks because it allows you to play a Sentinel sort of later in the game, and then make sure that your other units can keep attacking. So I end up taking the Gamorrean Retainer. I think this is like a pretty disciplined pick, which sucks because Tobias Beckett is good. He's aggressively statted, and so is the 5 resource 5/6 with Saboteur. Um, Here we see another discerning veteran, 2 resource unit in space, but I think it's just another discerning veteran. I take the second discerning veteran, and I only end up running one in the beginning because I was thinking I don't want a ton of 5 drops that are, not aggressively attacking. But I think it's a mistake, and I end up changing it after match one, game one, and go back to playing 4 5 drop unit, 5 resource units. Here we just take a timely intervention. 3 resource 3/4 is fine. We're pretty much never going to have it turned on unless it's turn one and our opponent has a bounty, which is pretty, I don't want to say completely unlikely, but not super common. And I think in aggro decks, the timely intervention is just good at clearing the way for your lower resource units to be able to get through damage. It sort of has like a similar slot with Discerning Veteran where it just helps put through some damage. We do give some thought to the 2 resource droid that helps free your captured units, but I'm not super concerned about my units getting captured in an aggro deck. We're just always trying to push through damage, so not the end of the world. Here is the Cloud Rider, and this is sort of what we were talking about earlier. If Yellow's not super open, being passed to the left, we'd be getting some to our right. So even though we're not going to get a ton of yellow cards because we have Cad Bane to our left, there's still going to be a couple that sneak through, and a Cloud Rider is one of the more important cards for us to get. Its effect with Jabba is just so strong, or excuse me, with Boba is so strong. It becoming a 4 power unit for only 2 resources allows it to trade up. On when we have 5+ resources, it allows us to play 2 or more units, and having one of them being able to trade up is just so strong. I look at Rule with Respect, and I've never played this card. It seems pretty mediocre. And I think I jokingly asked the player to my right, Wes, if this card is any good, even though I'm not going to take it. I'm taking Resourceful Pursuers, 5 resource. 5/6 with Saboteur is exactly what we want at the top end of this curve. Typically don't want to be playing anything higher than 5, but I think we make an exception for Enfys Nest. Here we're just taking a 3 resource 3/5. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any text. It doesn't trigger with Boba Fett, but 3 resource 3/5 is still very above rate for a 3 drop, and we're happy to take it. Looking again, we're not going to take any ramp cards. It's an easy Fugitive Wookiee. Bounty does trigger Boba Fett, so it does curve a little bit of his downside, but it is something to note that it can be a liability, particularly in these more aggressive decks, playing the Fugitive Wookiee, because the bounty is such a strong effect against aggro decks. Them being able to exhaust your strongest creature or the creature they think that's going to attack next is not nothing. So you need to be very cognizant of taking the initiative aggressively, because if they're able to take the initiative, eat your Wookiee, and then exhaust one of your units, it could be potentially backbreaking. Losing tempo is not something that aggressive decks can afford to do because they can't make it up later on with stronger cards, right? They just need to be constantly pushing through damage. So something to note, you got to be careful when playing that card, but at the end of the day, it is a 2 resource 3/3, which is just pretty strong. So happy to pick that up, happy to pick up more 2 drops, and the deck's curve is starting to become a little bit more rounded out. So I'm always taking that card and happy to have it in my deck. A little bit of pause on the draft here as we get to the last couple picks. Sort of give you my thoughts of where I'm at looking at my deck. It's It doesn't have anything flashy. Oh, here's another Resourceful Pursuers. So we're happy to take that. It's weird with decks like this that are this aggressive, they never seem to look as strong as they are, right? It's like it's just a bunch of commons on commons. This deck kind of looks like a pile, but this deck is in fact pretty strong. Like I'm actually very happy with where this deck is ending up right now, considering we don't have any like strict bombs. Like you're what makes these decks strong is not their super powerful units or removal or interaction. It's just like the ability to sort of negate your opponent's ability to interact with the board in a meaningful way. If they're just constantly chasing a bunch of low resource units and taking a bunch of damage, it's so hard for them to put together and or like execute their plan because they're always on the back foot. And that's what these kinds of decks do. And that's why it's so strong to be yellow because you also have ambush to deal with sort of the units that they have that are 2 for 1. Also, another thing to note is that you're taking ambush units out of the pool, which you don't want to think about cutting too much, but if they are improving your deck, you're also likely to, or it's less likely that you're going to be playing against a bunch of ambush units, which is also important. Here we are thinking between, oh, I see Survivor's Gauntlet, and I'm just like, oh, card's so strong. I wish I could take it, but I just need to take more shitty commons and uncommons because that's what's actually good. We go back and look to see how many underworld units we have, and there's some smudge on this, which is unfortunate. This isn't our card, but look, it's only 3 is raised 5. And I think we have enough underworld that we end up taking McClunky. McClunky can just be so strong, and it's just so likely that we get an outflank. Like you have to be green and aggro to take that card. We definitely don't want any more bounty card advantage things or bounty card advantage events or upgrades or whatever the that resource that card is called classed as. So here we see Echo and another 2 resource 3/3 and Fugitive Wookiee. I think the play here is Echo. While he's not super aggressively statted, um, in a deck that's playing a ton of commons and uncommons, we're just going to have a bunch of 2 ofs, which we end up seeing we had 2 ofs of just so much of our curve. And even though we like to think of Restore as something that's for the more mid-range and controlling decks, all decks in this game are racing on some like axis, right? They're always going to be in some back and forth and attacking. So like there is like an aggressive strategy when you are healing, quote unquote aggressively, because you're just going to be able to race your opponents better. This is the most important card for the deck. You just want Adelphi Patrol Wings. They are the strongest cards in this deck. They just give you so much in terms of being able to push through damage and in terms of action economy. So I'm just very happy to pick this up. And now that we're yellow, we're getting some of these free, some of these 1 resource 2/3s in space. Again, the bounty is pretty negligible, but the ability to have 3 toughness on a 2 power unit in space is just so strong. Also, bounty triggers Boba Fett, so it's a 1 resource way to turn his ability on and get some extra damage in. But I'm happy to be playing this card. I think this card is very strong, especially when it finds its way into Rey Yellow, which isn't a deck you see a ton of, but something we saw on Friday and we think that is pretty strong, is being able to turn that into a 3 resource 3/4. You play that on turn 1, pump it, turn 2, play a Y-Wing, and it just becomes so hard for your opponent to not take the 2 damage from the Y-Wing because it's developed on turn 2. Also taking the 3 damage a turn from that. Racing in space with this is just so strong. So I'm happy to pick one of these up. Would love to get another one, which I think I end up doing. And it just ends me up with a bunch of 2 ofs as well as for the Echo. Okay. Some red horror cards here, but here we see a take captive, and even though our units don't have a ton of HP or toughness, I still like Take Captive. Take Captive to me is just completely just a card that you want to play as a tempo advantage or something if you have a ton of stuff with shield. But for us, we're happy to have that card be removed. We just need to get stuff out of the way just long enough so that we can push through damage. I don't care if the unit I'm playing it on dies and our opponent gets it back. As long as we're pushing through damage, that's all I care about. Here I take Frozen and Carbonite, which seems like kind of an odd pick, but 5 resource exhaust the unit permanently is pretty strong. The cards that I like playing above curve are the types of cards that interact with my opponent's board, especially if I'm in an aggressive deck. Anything that helps me push through that final damage is what I want to be doing. So I am completely happy taking that card. I'm happy to pay 5 resources for it, the same way I'm happy to pay 5 resources for a discerning veteran. It just helps push through damage. In this game particularly, what it's the way it's helping push through damage is being able to sort of pseudo remove one of my opponent's more powerful units, and then they won't be able to trade into the top end of our curve with our resourceful, with our 5 unit 5/6s, or hopefully can protect a 5 resource 3/4 with capture. We definitely don't want a third Outlaw Corona, but we're definitely happy to take Surprise Strike. We're an aggro deck. Surprise Strike is totally a great card to help us push through some extra damage. It also helps with our action economy in that it doesn't only pump, but it helps us attack, as opposed to something like the +4/+4, which only gives push through one more damage, but doesn't actually help the action economy, which is what makes it so much weaker. Being able to guarantee that extra attack while it's attached to your pump is really what makes the pump spells so strong. Excuse me. Sort of getting to the end of the draft here. I really like where the deck has come together, and then here we see another 1 resource 2/3. This card is just exactly what we're looking for. Something inexpensive, and we could play. Guarantees a lot of hits in space, hard to interact with. It's just perfect for our deck. Also, not to mention having 2 ofs anything gives us the ability to trigger Echo, which is probably unlikely, but still super strong. I'm not super high on Y-Wing, but I am really high on aggro decks with cards that give you help out with your action economy in exchange for cards. So I take a look here and I end up seeing that we have a ton of cheap space units, so it's not what I'm looking for. And I end up taking the 1 resource attack with 2 units. I think that card just makes way more sense. I think it's going to help the deck a lot more than just another random flyer. And also just like Y-Wing a lot more in Raid. I don't think it really makes sense in the all-in aggro deck. Like a good player's gonna be able to play around Y-Wing and in a way that they're not going to play to as much with Ray. So I'm pretty sure I take the outflank. Looking at this now, I know I would take outflank, but again, this draft was a week ago. But I'm trying to think what I was thinking here. I'm trying to think where the slots in the curve if I'm switching it out for the 2 resource 2/2 in space, but even then it's probably doing a similar amount of damage. Like maybe the 2 resource 1/3 gets in for the extra 2 damage sometimes, but I think it's just outflank. Outflank just lets you attack with your units, develop, and then claim. It's just so much stronger. Here, there's nothing for us to take, so I just take a Wookiee Warrior. Pretty unlikely to end up playing it. Maybe there's something instead about taking Disabling Fang Fighter just to cut it, since I'm pretty much never playing the Wookiee. So 4 drops is where we want the curve to sort of slow down. We don't really want to be playing a ton of 4 and 5 drops. Typically, you don't want to cut, but if you know you're just out completely out of playable as you do, so I do end up cutting it here so it doesn't hit my Frozen Carbonite, but I don't think it really matters. Here's a 4 drop that we do actually end up liking to play. If you play this and have the initiative, you always basically attack with this first, and then you negate the attacks with their stronger units. So It's a good pickup. I'm sure we'll find it. Place for it in the deck. Again, here, I think I just end up taking the unit that ends up with a potential to have Sentinel or the one that exhausts. I don't think it actually matters. Looking to my left, I don't think that either of them are playing Heroic. We take the removal spell. This is a clean answer to a lot of our 2 and 3 drops, and that is the draft.